at the FGC OS, which Phil had mentioned here about 2 weeks ago, in regards to a question that was handed to him on the Level 1 Goutcast. Now, Phil basically name drops Arturo Sanchez. I reached out to Arturo. We'll look at that. That's kind of sus. But basically, we're going to look into Phil's claims about this FGC OS, because I've now installed this twice on 2 different systems. Both systems were pretty poor in regards to performance, latency, just all-around stability. And then we're going to look at the FGC OS itself. We're going to go over the entire install guide because it's out there, right? It's public. So let's take a look at what Phil has to say, and then we'll jump right in.
Zangief, you're like, why the fuck can't I never get those opportunities. He's reading everything. He's predicting well. He's reading. He's baiting. You know. First of all, just playing the game offline at a tournament, I'm sure, is such a much better experience than trying to play this shit online and do all of that, you know. You notice the pro players all play on PC for a reason. They're not playing on PS5. They ain't playing on Xbox. They're all on PC for a very good reason. That reduced input delay is a huge thing, especially, again, from mid-screen with how fast things are in this game. It's a critical thing, I think. It's necessary. You know, and good for him to be able to do that. I'm happy for him, you know. I don't think I would ever get to that level, quite frankly. I don't think I would. GT, you are completely wrong, and if you say one more incorrect thing, you're out of here. Because I'm tired of people coming to my chat, spouting incorrect facts, thinking they know what the fuck they're talking about. Really. I've had enough. I'm not even going to tell you what he says, so stupid. It's enough of the bullshit. People come in here, oh, I know better than you. There's 50,000 master players, and they're not all pro players. And by the way, just so you know, PC input delay is the same as the console. Okay, you're just an idiot. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. There's literally entirely designed and tweaked operating systems to reduce delay on PC that the pro players are using so that they have less input than anyone else playing the game. Because I'm friends with fucking Arturo Sanchez, you idiot. I know all about it.
Okay, so let's debunk Phil's claims here. Now, FGC OS is not an operating system. It's not a designed operating system. All FGOS is Windows 7, 10, or 7, 8, 8.1, 10, or 11 that is highly tweaked to lower input latency, but it in fact doesn't. And we'll show that here later on. Now, Phil stating that he's friends with Arturo Sanchez, well, that's a lie as well, because remember, Phil has stated he doesn't need friends, he has a wife. So, right out, we could throw that out the window right there, Phil. Now, as for input delay across PlayStation 5, Xbox, and PC, well, Phil's lying, okay? Of course he is. So the Xbox Series X right here, 58.30. The Series S is lower, and I'll get to that here shortly, at 55.65. PC is 58.93, so it's slightly worse than the Xbox Series X and S, and then the PlayStation 5 is at 57.4. So out of all three, the Series S is faster because it runs a lower resolution. But we're not going to count that because Phil doesn't use the Series X or Series S. He uses X or the PS5. So Phil has gone to the PlayStation 5. He's probably seen this, so that's why he's gone to the average for PS5 and seen that the input delay is lower. So he's thinking he's going to get that advantage by almost 1 millisecond. Now, in reality, I'll just answer this here. Can you lower input latency on the PC? Really? Not by software tweaks, which is what the FGC OS is, and we'll get into that here shortly. So my conversation with Arturo Sanchez is as follows. I sent him a message here on Wednesday a couple days ago. It's Sunday that I'm filming this video. Now, so after I spoke to him, because I wanted to talk to him, I wanted to sit down on Discord, I wanted to interview him and everything about this FGC OS, because he has done a interview already on Retro RGB. I'll have it linked down in the description, where they try to get technical information about this, but Arturo won't. He dances around the question like Phil, like he skirts it. And I had contacted a bunch of FGC players, people within the FGC community, and they had warned me about talking with Arturo here. And you'll see why here in a second. So he says, for the record, the guide is incomplete, wasn't supposed to be public. I haven't advertised it anywhere as far as an install guide. Well, that's incorrect. Because when I spoke to him, as you can see, this is Arturo's site, and he admits that this is his site. So, because I actually linked it to him, and he says the guide is incomplete. Wasn't supposed to be public, but as of filming this video, it still is public. So I'd like to do an interview, blah, blah, blah. I don't hear from him for like a day. And then, so I sent him another message on Friday, asking him again for, you know, I'll be testing and reinstall the FGC OS tonight on live stream. I couldn't do it because the FGC OS actually took down my streaming PC. Again, I use two PCs. My main gaming rig, my 13900K, 3080 Ti, 32 gigs, DDR5, 7200, 2 terabyte 990 Pro, which is what I'm filming this on right now. I don't stream from this PC at all. It's just primarily for gaming and maybe recording videos. I have an entirely different system here. You can see at the bottom right. That is what I am currently using. It has a base install of Windows 11 Professional with all the drivers installed on it. As you can see, it's running latency mod, and we'll get into that once we go through the guide here. So basically, he goes, sorry, I've been in the ER, so I wasn't replying. This is basically the same excuse he gave when people asked him about when he had issues with Matcherino. If you don't know what that is, just search NYC Furby, Matcherino, Fiasco, or Drama, and you'll hear what goes on there. Now, in my eyes, because I took a deep dive into that, and I again spoke to FGC players, Arturo Sanchez within the FGC, it's kind of like Phil within the FGC, right? Like, I don't want to say, because I don't want to speak ill about the guy, but he's not somebody to be trusted. And this FGC OS, it's just not going to work. And a lot of the tweaks in it, Arturo says that you can't damage your PC by doing these. You actually can, and I will show you how. So he basically now wants to look over my install. I won't give him access to my PC whatsoever. I'm going to recommend anybody that has installed this or has had Arturo install this on their PCs, wipe your system out, back up your data first, wipe the system out, and reinstall Windows, because we'll get into the reasons why here. So basically, this is FGC OS. This is what Arturo has put out there publicly for people to use. So we can click on getting started. Pre-installation basically goes over downloading a Windows 10 stock ISO. You actually do not have to do this at all. Microsoft provides, if you search for Windows 10 Media Creation Tool or Windows 11 Media Creation Utility, there's actually a website. We can bring it up here right now. Windows 11 Media Creation Tool. Right from Microsoft. All you have to do is click this. This is the ISO, or you can just click this. It downloads a program called Media Creation Tool, and you just keep clicking next. You select your USB drive that you want to use. It must be a minimum of 8 gigs. And install. It'll do everything for you. It'll format the USB key. It'll copy the bootable image to the USB key. You don't have to do any of it. But this is actually completely useless, and we'll get into that on the next step. Atlas registry, you don't need it. This just disables Windows Update. That's all it does. I use a program called DDU, or Display Driver Uninstaller. You can get it from Wagnersoft. It's got a one-button click to disable Windows Update driver installs. I do it. I recommend doing it because I don't want Microsoft Windows installing any drivers. I will do that by myself. So once you get into the installation method, right, he says disable internet, do a video call, reboot. So basically what he wants you to do, install AnyDesk, and he will remote access to your computer and do these things for you. Now, realistically, tweaking Windows, you can do that all by yourself. Nobody needs to do it for you, and we're going to get into some reasons here. Now, basically, the big thing about FGC OS is using ReviOS. What is ReviOS? ReviOS is just basically Windows 10 or Windows 11 that's been cut down. And that means there's a bunch of services disabled, Windows Update is disabled, Windows Defender has been removed, so is Microsoft Edge, Cortana has been removed. All the junk that's inside the PC, like the bloat from Windows, is removed. Now, under Windows 10 and Windows 11, there is some bloat, but most of the time removing it isn't going to improve PC performance all that much, especially when it comes to things like input latency. So you're not going to really hugely benefit. Like, it's going to disable all the telemetry and garbage that's installed on the system. That's true, right? I do it, but I do it by myself because I know what I'm looking for. It doesn't take that long. It's not that hard to do. So all you have to do is click on ReviOS, click on Downloads. You have two options, Windows 10 or Windows 11. Now, he recommends installing from the playbook. You have to get AME. Again, you don't have to do this. All you have to do is click download. I don't suggest doing an upgrade. Once the download is complete, and I actually have that downloaded here, this is the ReviOS. This is the image that it creates, 3.75 gigabyte. Because again, it is Windows 10, it is Windows 11, just cut back. Now, with ReviOS, they do have an install guide. And all they recommend you to do is you're going to download a piece of software, Ventoy, and you can then extract and install it to a USB drive. And it creates a bootable USB for you, which is perfectly fine. Like, I've done this. I don't like using ReviOS because it does disable Windows updates. I do use Windows Defender on my systems. You can see the system on the right here, the bottom right, that is running Windows 11 base install, and we'll get into that shortly. So Windows Defender is running on there, Windows Firewall is running, Windows Updates is running, and as you can see, using what Arturo has recommended, there is no latency issues. Latency is a little high, but that's just system latency, that isn't input latency. So anything prior to this point in the install guide that Arturo has made is completely useless. You don't need to do any of this because ReviOS will do everything for you. So now we get into Windows setup. So he has a couple apps here to install. WinRAR, I don't use WinRAR, I use 7-Zip. Brave is a browser, just like Tor. If you want to use it, go ahead. It makes no difference to me. I use Google Chrome because I have a ton of memory. I don't give a shit. OpenShell you do not need, and Snappy Driver Install. All Snappy Driver Install is, so when you download your driver, instead of clicking next, it does all that for you. So you just click once and it does everything. I don't want that because what if the driver has like shit software, like it's going to install something weird like AVG or something like that, right? I don't want it doing that. So I'll do the driver installs myself. Now, this is where we get to the driver installs that he recommends doing. Realtek Audio. Now, I don't have a Realtek Audio on Titan here. I either use a shit audio, Magnius Modius setup, or I use a Sound Blaster or Creative Sound Blaster AE5 Plus Pure Edition. So I wouldn't be using Realtek Audio drivers. Realtek Audio is done through CPU cycles, so it's not like a hardware-driven audio, it is a software-driven audio. So just keep that in mind. Install your Ethernet LAN drivers. Nowheres in this guide does he state about installing chipset drivers, which will give power management tweaks, PCI Express driver, your telemetry, or not telemetry, your Intel thermal driver, your Intel SIO driver, your Wi-Fi. None of this, he doesn't state to install any of that. So using the FGC OS install method, you would have a lot of devices that are not installed on your system. What if you use Thunderbolt to attach your USB devices like I do, right? I use Thunderbolt 4. I have from, what's it called?
Obviously, I need tips. Pay my taxes, pay my back taxes, pay my utilities, pay my mortgage, pay my internet bill, pay my utilities.
CalDigit. Don't know why I couldn't remember that. I use two of these. The Element Hub. I have two of these plugged in on my system. The Thunderbolt 4 Element Hub. Now, Each port on my PC, I have two Thunderbolt 4 ports on my PC. Each is capable of 40 gigabits per second transfer rates, and each port has 4 USB ports in it. Now, these are just USB 3.2 2x2 ports, Gen 2. So, I have keyboard and mouse plugged into one, or actually plugged into two because my keyboard has 2 USB ports on it because of the USB pass-through and power. My mouse is also plugged into my keyboard, and I use an 8 kHz mouse from Razer. I then have my microphone and then my webcam. So I only need one. If I need my second one, that's what I use for my capture card, which I'm doing currently because I'm using my I'm using this PC to record this video. So I use 2 of these. So following Arturo Sanchez's method for installing the FGC OS, my Thunderbolt wouldn't work, right? So I had to revert back to just plugging my USB devices directly into the back of my PC. Although when I did my test, my first initial test, and I'll show you the test here at the end of the video, I did not have my microphone plugged in. All that was plugged in was the keyboard and mouse. That is all that was plugged into the system. Now, GPU drivers, we're going to do this here really quick. He basically says to use NV clean install if you're using NVIDIA. With AMD, AMD actually has the ability to cut down the driver within its own driver. That's up to you what you want to do. I have an NVIDIA card. I don't use NVIDIA clean install. And I'm going to show you guys how to edit your driver here really quick. So you've downloaded the latest driver, right? This is the 537.13. I don't use this on my systems. I'm using 537.35, which is a Vulkan media driver, because it has updated Vulkan drivers and Vulkan libraries. So all you have to do is, if you're using WinRAR or if you're using 7-zip, all you have to do is go show more options, extract files, let it do its thing really quick. Hit Control A, it'll select everything. Now all we're going to do is we're going to choose these files to keep. Now some of these files we actually don't need to keep. So HD audio, I have my system permanently attached to my laser projector for my 120-inch screen. That way I can play games on my 120-inch screen. Also, so if you're not using HDMI audio through your video card, you don't need to install this. You'll just set up as a normal HD audio device. If you don't use games that use NVIDIA physics, you don't need to install physics either, because it's going to be useless. You're not going to use it. So those two options can also be deleted. All you need is the display driver and NVI2. Lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to edit the setup.cfg. You're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and these 3 lines of code you're going to delete. If you want to pause the video here and actually do this, go right ahead. Just make sure you're selecting the correct 3 lines of code. Save the file, and then run setup.
I don't care about anyone telling me that I need to improve or change. My nigga, I have your IP, I have your name, and I have your address.
Agree, custom and advanced, perform clean installation. Now, if you're doing this off a clean install of Windows, then you don't need to do anything prior to this. If you want to update your driver on your current system, what I would recommend, uninstall all the NVIDIA software from the control panel, download a program called Display Driver Uninstaller, DDU, from Wagnersoft. Reboot into safe mode, run the Display Driver Uninstaller. It'll make sure all the registry entries, all files in the computer are completely removed. Then boot into Windows and then do this method and install your driver. And this is all you need to do. Right? You don't need to do any NVIDIA clean or NV clean install, nothing like that. That's completely useless. You can do it all on your own. It's very easy. So next up, he's going to talk about editing the NVIDIA control panel right here, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to open up the NVIDIA control panel. Now, I use G-Sync So G-Sync is always going to be enabled. I do not enable it for windowed mode and full screen. I only have it enabled for full screen mode. The reason being is windowed mode, because of how Windows 10 and Windows 11 operate, there can be issues with windowed games and G-Sync. So, and same as FreeSync or any type of VRR. It's just as a precaution. If you want to enable it, you can. You don't need to. Also, I will also go into change resolution. I'll make sure my refresh rate is set to 100 Hz. I use an Acer Predator X34, so it's a 100 Hz monitor. If you're using physics, make sure your NVIDIA GeForce or your NVIDIA GeForce card is selected. And then when you go into manage 3D settings, so he recommends to have low latency mode set to ultra. Now, setting low latency mode to ultra can cause issues in some games. One that comes to mind is Diablo 4. Now, Diablo 4 also uses Reflex, NVIDIA Reflex. So if you have a graphics card that supports NVIDIA Reflex, it will overtake low latency mode. It'll disable low latency mode and it'll use Reflex. The problem is that it will enable screen tearing, reflex mode, and low latency mode, regardless if you have G-Sync on or not. The only way to alleviate that in Diablo 4 is to enable V-Sync, and that will increase input latency. The thing that you should be doing is you should be using a frame rate limiter. Now, the reason behind this is I have a 3080 Ti OC, factory OC. Now, if I was playing a game, say my Hertz star monitor is 100 Hertz, right? But my graphics card is capable of producing, like, let's say World of Warcraft. I can get up to like 400, 500, 600 frames per second. Your monitor is only going to display 100 frames per second because the Hertz is at 100. So anything above that just gets dumped out. That doesn't happen. If you limit your frame rate, it can lower latency because your GPU no longer has to provide all those extra frames. So it's actually beneficial to lower your, use a max frame rate that is equivalent to your monitor's hertz. So if you're using a 60 hertz monitor, use 60 frames per second. If you're using 100 hertz, use 100 frames per second. 120 frames per second. 144 frames per second. That is how it should be set up. Okay, now, of course, power management mode, yes, you should have prefer maximum performance, right? That way the system isn't idling. Like sometimes it won't boost to 3D clocks when you start up a game. This makes sure that it will. Then he also recommends setting your texture quality, does he? No, he doesn't. Huh. Okay. So he doesn't recommend doing this, so I'm going to recommend doing this. Change your texture filtering quality to high performance. High performance just means it's going to use more optimizations to the GPU, and it's going to be a faster performance for you. It's not going to adjust image quality. It does, but you're never, ever, ever going to be able to notice the image quality difference. And then, of course, make sure that vertical sync is off. I have mine turned to on because in Diablo 4, again, like I have issues, and that's my main game that I'm playing right now. Okay, and then we have the ReviOS here. So basically, again, this is just the Windows 11 3.75 gigabyte, right? Okay, and then, of course, custom resolution utility. Now, this is what I'm talking about. He's got a lot of redundancy, a lot of repeat shit. We're going to see that pop up in this guide here. Custom resolution utility isn't needed anymore. You can actually do this through the NVIDIA control panel and through the AMD control panel as well. This hasn't really been a thing since like Windows 7, 8, 8.1, where you needed a custom resolution utility. It doesn't exist anymore. Verify the refresh rate of my monitor, we already have. Microsoft redistributables, you can do this yourself, but typically when you install games, they will install these themselves. There won't be an issue. So next up, we're going to head into optimizations, and this is where things get a little bit freaky, stuff that I would not recommend doing. So do not disable, of course, none of this stuff is being disabled. Game util, kill desktop Windows Manager. Again, this doesn't exist in Windows 10 and 11. This hasn't existed since 7, 8, and 8.1. So there's no reason that you should be using, or that you should be looking for this in Windows 10. There is no DWM. It doesn't exist anymore in Windows 10 and Windows 11. Whatever, all this is just nonsense. Latency Mon, again, Latency Mon is a program for looking for audio and video dropouts. It's not basically used for input latency. Yes, you can use it for total system latency, which you see is currently still running on the system to the bottom right. That is the test system that I had set up. And this is the baseline test. This is just a regular version of Windows 11. We can actually look at it now. I'm going to turn this off. As you can see, it states, conclusion, your system appears to be suitable for handling real-time audio and other tasks without dropouts. So base Windows 11 install, perfectly fine. Windows Defender is running, Windows Update's running, Windows Firewall is enabled. We're just going to stop it. Now we're going to open up systems just so everybody can see here, so Arturo doesn't think I'm cheating him in any way. Again, Windows 11 Pro, 32 gigs of memory. I have changed the system out, like I said. This is an Asus Strix Scar 2 from 2018, 2019. I changed out the memory. I'm using 32 gigs of CL16 memory instead of the junk that it came with. I've changed out the hard drive. Instead, it's an NVMe 990 Pro 1 terabyte. And the processor is an 8th gen 6-core 12 threads, and it has a 1070 Ti inside. As you can see here, all the drivers are installed perfectly fine. I use a website called Station Drivers. I do not use drivers from Asus because those drivers are way outdated. I want to use the latest and greatest. So everything is the latest and greatest for Intel chipset, MEI, framework driver, thermal driver, SIO driver, the latest Realtek drivers for LAN, for audio. I also swapped out the Wi-Fi card in this. And I'm going to be swapping it out again here for the Wi-Fi 7 cards, so that this uses Wi-Fi 6E. And then, of course, the display driver, the 1070. Now, I use the 537.35 driver, because that is the latest Vulkan driver. It is a little bit newer than the driver that is available on NVIDIA's Game Ready site. So this is just a brand new, fresh install, because Friday night I did not stream because the FGC OS completely cratered my streaming PC, which is my laptop. So then he recommends to install Steam Intelligent Standby List Cleaner, MSI tool. Now the MSI tool, again, I wouldn't use this on a Windows 10 or a Windows 11 based system because of how the IRQs work, and that's what MSI tool is. If you bring up MSI tool, basically it tells you about interrupt resources. IRQ node, right, and make sure that you're not running your devices on the same IRQ. Now this is no longer an issue in Windows 10 or 11 because they use a virtual IRQ. Because of how UEFI is run, Windows 7 and Windows 8, 8.1, yes, that was an issue. It is no longer a problem under Windows 10 or 11. You don't need to use this tool. I used it, and I had issues with drivers just not booting up when the system started. I kept getting access violation errors constantly, right? So, again, this is something that I wouldn't use. And you can see the dates on a lot of this stuff, like 2013. Like, that's a decade ago. Again, under Windows 10, Windows 11, this isn't an issue. MSI tool you do not need to use. The Calypso latency guide. Okay, so this one is really bad. Now, this was actually removed offline. The guy that makes it, this Calypso guy. Now, again, we're going to go through this here. This is going to be the longest part of the video, probably. Now, measure your latency. Now, we've already been doing that with Latency Mon. Again, like, this is where things get a little bit difficult because I don't think Arturo honestly knows, and you can see a lot of this here is used for Windows 7, Windows 8. He does have a little bit of Windows 10 stuff tested in here. Windows 10 is a little bit better when it comes to latency due to how a lot of the stuff operates now, like a lot of stuff in the background. Windows 10 and Windows 11 are very good at functioning, right? It's not like Windows 7, and especially like Windows 8, 8.1, where there was a lot of issues. Now, latency mon for latency, again, for input latency, really, I don't like people using it for input latency because it's not what it's meant for. And I've over-explained it already. Now, you can download programs like Mouse Tester and everything like that, but the thing is, with newer gen mice, if you have a 1000 hertz mouse, or 1000 kilohertz, I should say, it's not hertz. It's the polling rate. It's called kilohertz. They will function at 1000 kilohertz out of the box unless you install the software and change it. Same as the 4 kilohertz mouse and the 8 kilohertz mouse. I use an 8 kilohertz mouse here. Mine functions at 8 kilohertz. I can install the software and adjust it. Sometimes you might want to do that. If you're playing first-person shooters, you might want to adjust your polling rate. You might want to adjust the mouse sensitivity when you're zooming in. And you can have scripts set up, so when you hit your zoom, it changes your mouse, and when you come back out of zoom, it changes it back. So again, they're looking for like mouse test or anything like that. This Calypso guide isn't really used for like fighting games. This is just, from what I can tell, it's first-person shooters, right? Now, it does have some benefits, but there are some that can be dangerous. Now, this is correct. So disable hyperthreading or SMT. Don't. Okay, you have to go into your BIOS, like the systems he's testing, like a 9700K and a 2700. The problem with disabling hyperthreading is functionality for things like outside of gaming will be slower. Some games benefit from hyperthreading, some games don't, right? And AMD's version of hyperthreading is called SMT. I don't disable hyperthreading on my system at all, and I don't have any issues with performance or latency. Most of the games I play will benefit from hyperthreading or SMT. It's on a per game basis. I believe right now Starfield actually benefits from disabling hyperthreading. Starfield itself is a poorly designed game in my eyes. Like, just looking at performance numbers and everything, it's way below where it should be at for a game that looks and functions like shit. Okay, so I would recommend not doing this. Now, with avoid multi-CCX Risen chips, this is actually true. Within the 5900, 5950, and then the newer models, the only models below on the AMD Risen that only have one CCX are the 7800X and below. If you're using like the 5900, 5950, or the 7950, or the X3D 7900, 7950, because of how AMD's Infinity Fabric works, because there's two chips, there's latency that's caused using the Infinity Fabric so that they can communicate. This is proven. That's why the 7800X3D performs better at gaming than the 7950 and the 7900X. So if you're doing a gaming PC, stay away from the multi-CCX CPUs. Use a 7800X3D. That's going to be your best outside of a 13900K. That's just for gaming, okay? Now we're going to get into some of the stuff that will cause you problems. Now, we saw the latency mode here by doing these tweaks here. We didn't do these tweaks at all. Now, if you disable dynamic tick, you also have to start adjusting your HPET. What is HPET? High Precision Event Timer. Now, this is a clock for Windows. Basically, how it staggers processes. The problem with HPET, it no longer exists like it did in Windows 8 or 8.1. You then have to download a timer utility, like a memory timer utility, and you have to manually adjust your clocks. Just disabling dynamic tick does fuck all and will cause higher latency. So let's do that here on this fresh install.
And it starts to click, you know, if someone just keeps saying sorry when they do something.
Now, in order for you to take advantage of it, you're going to have to restart the PC.
Right? If apologizing isn't just words, it's I will not do this thing again.
And then we'll rerun latency one, and we'll let that run in the background, and I'll show you about latency issues.
Doing the thing, it's not actually an apology.
So nowhere in this guide does it state that you have to then adjust your clock. So what they're doing here is where X is blah blah blah, use platform tick. Basically what you're going through, so when you disable dynamic tick and you disable HPET, like HPET, the driver is still here. So what you would have to do is you would have to disable this driver. Right? You can't uninstall, you can't turn it off. Do not turn it off in the BIOS. If you turn it off in the BIOS, it will then function on PMT, which is a lot slower method. What you would have to do is then you have to adjust using a memory timer, like I said, to set the clock manually. What's going to happen now is the latency timer itself can now spike to 15 milliseconds up to 150 milliseconds. We'll bring up latency mod.
Apologizing isn't just words. It's I will not do this thing again.
And we'll let it do its thing. Now, as you can see, it's already higher than what it was initially. Okay, like we started off in like the 80s and everything like that, 90s. It's functioning worse than what it was, but we'll let that run while we go through everything else here. Now, the problem with the next step here, this is where things can go haywire for you. And again, so here, it already failed. So just by disabling dynamic click, we've already run into massive latency issues. So without adjusting our clock manually, you now have a massive, massive amount of latency. So this guide here is incomplete. Okay, because it doesn't go through your latency methods. Now again, this is Windows 10, Windows 11. Right? These things are all tested on like Windows 7, Windows 8. So just keep that in mind. So again, this is already bad. So disable processor idle states. This is basically disabling C state so that your processor functions at 100% speed in Windows, even idle on the desktop. The problem with this is if you have newer CPUs, right? Say you have like a 13900K, right? So the 13900K, Intel lists it as, what, 253 watts? This isn't 100% true. It could spike higher than this. I think like Gamers Nexus had like pegged like 320 watts. So doing something like that is not very good for your processor, and it will degrade your processor quicker than you would be using it normally. Now, prior to doing the disable dynamic tick here, nothing was changing here. I didn't disable any C states. You saw that we weren't having any latency problems. Now that I've started doing the disable C state, or not C state, disable dynamic tick, the system is crapping out, right? And that isn't good. So they're recommending that you disable C states. I don't. Disabling C states can cause, like I said, faster degradation in the CPU. If you don't have proper cooling, it can cause your CPU to overheat, or it can cause your CPU to throttle, which is then going to increase latency because you're going to get performance spikes when you're playing your game, right? Again, you want to have proper cooling. You want to have these C states enabled to protect your processor from dying, basically, right? And he even says that more responsive, higher temperature power usage. Well, no shit. He's basing this Calypso guide is based off of old hardware. It's not based off of any new hardware. Device manager. Disable adapters. Now on some systems, yes, you will have an Intel display adapter, as well as if you have a discrete GPU like an NVIDIA card or an AMD card, you will have two. You don't actually need to do this anymore because of how UEFI and Windows 10 and Windows 11 function. The Intel driver will probably be disabled, or it will actually work in conjunction with your GPU. Now, some games will actually allow you to change between the graphics card in your system, right? Like if I go into like World of Warcraft, I can then change from integrated graphics. I use a 13900KF, so I have no integrated graphics. I just have my 3080 Ti. That's all I have here, right? Now, you can do that. Right-click disable. It's not going to cause any issues. Disabling all WAN mini ports, it depends on what you're using to connect to the internet. Are you going through wired or are you going through Wi-Fi? You don't want to disable the wrong one and then screw up your Wi-Fi adapter, right? Microsoft iSATA-P adapter, there's no reason to disable this. It's not going to help. Microsoft iSCSI initiator is not going to help with latency at all. Disabling these things here, again, this is not going to affect performance. I don't know why you would disable your SMS bus. Like, that's stupid. Like, that is stupid. Ugh. It's just bad tweaks. It's just random stuff that's been online for like 2 decades since Windows XP was around that they're just recommending people do. Expand PCI bus and expand just your PCI Express root ports, disabling your root ports. You can do this from within the BIOS, which is actually more beneficial because then it's not booting when Windows boots. Right? I do this on mine. I go through each port because I'm only using 2 PCI Express ports. Every other port on my system is disabled in the BIOS. I wouldn't recommend doing it through the through Windows because the device is still powering up and it's still being loaded when Windows starts. HCI 1.0 serial controller disable any channel, nothing connected to it. Yeah, you're going to be doing that if you're disabling your serial ports. Like I don't use SATA ports in my system. I use the M.2. I have 990 Pro NVMe drive, so I don't use any of the SATA ports. Again, disable this in the BIOS, not in Windows. Disable any USB controllers or hubs with nothing connected to them. We're going to get to this here. It'll actually bring up... Let me bring something up here really quick. This is Old Man Alt. You guys know him as Alt Insider. We all know him best as Old Man Alt. Where is that? Fuck, there he is. Okay, where is that picture he sent me? Oh, there's Phil. So this is... We'll keep this up for later. Actually, let me save this to the drive. Okay, good. So we'll come back to that because we will discuss some of the USB tweaks he has in here. Disable unnecessary services. Now, none of this has to be done. This is why I talk about redundancy. Because you're using ReviOS, these services are already disabled. So none of this actually has to be done at all, right? Now, again, all this stuff I did because I wanted to see how it would perform. Any other services, Bluetooth user service, print spooler, like again, like just disable print spooler service. Your spooler won't turn on. Like I don't know why this is getting overcomplicated. Network connection list service, local awareness. Doing stuff like this, you may have issues then connecting to your network. If you use a network attached storage, like a NAS, which I do, you won't be able to connect to it by doing these tweaks. So this is a massive issue. Again, this is outdated because it's only being done for Windows 10 2.1H2, and we have 2.2H2 now is the latest version. Black Viper no longer exists. The guy's website is still there, but he's put it back to Black Viper. He's reverted it back to its 1999 status, so there isn't... This has all been removed. As of August 2023, this site's dead. There's nothing in here anymore. There is still some stuff for, I think, Windows 7 and 8.
So now, when you start reading them, you start looking at it, and it doesn't make any sense why he's even texting.
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff's been removed. It's gone, right? So that's useless. You can't use it. I personally do disable Windows services. I just used the base ReviOS when I did the test for FGC OS. Disable optional features. Of course, you can do that. Right? You just go into the control panel, you bring up programs and features, and then you click on Windows device or Windows applications on the top left, and then you could basically remove most of this stuff. Now, Windows Search isn't in Windows 10 or Windows 11. It is, but it's not removable through here. This is actually incomplete because the Windows... I'll show you mine. Programs and features. So this is mine here. I keep .NET Framework, of course. Why not? Because most of the stuff functions on .NET Framework. And I keep SMB Direct because I do connect to a network attached storage. And Windows PowerShell because I like using Windows PowerShell. Everything else I uncheck. It's all trash, right? And Windows Media Player you can get rid of through here because I use VLC. So that is completely useless and doesn't work anymore because it's outdated. Startup, of course. msconfig actually doesn't do anything under Windows 10 or Windows 11. If you type in msconfig, it will still come up. I do one tweak here. No GUI at boot. Apply, okay, restart your computer. That way, it will actually start up faster because there'll be no GUI popping up when Windows does. Startup. So when you go here, right, you got to go to Open Task Manager now, and it brings you to Task Manager. Now, on my system, I actually have, like, nothing running. Of course not. I have my Windows Defender Security Health System tray and my Sound Blaster live, right? That's all I need. Everything else is disabled or has been removed. I use actually special software, program called CCleaner, and we'll get into that when I do my Windows install in the next video. I'm going to go through format, updating the BIOS, loading Windows, loading all the drivers, and then doing tweaks and getting your game set up. It's a lot easier than following this shit guide. Disable DWM. Again, this isn't in Windows 10 or 11. It is in Windows 8.1, 8, and 7 or lower. Doesn't exist in Windows 10. Disable VBS HVC script. Virtualization-based security. I don't have this enabled on mine. It's actually disabled by default. So I don't know why you would be disabling this when it's already disabled. Like, I don't have this enabled whatsoever. Again, Windows Defender, with my system setup, the way I set up my Windows, I have Windows Defender running. I have Windows Firewall, I have Windows Updates running. I get less latency than FGC OS. Disable power saving features, like C-state, stuff like that. Disable Spectre Meltdown. Okay, yeah, if you want to get hacked, why not? It does increase performance. Yes, I will admit. Does it cause latency issues? No. This is basically performance issues. This is not going to help with latency, input latency at all. Okay, so this won't improve your Street Fighter 6 playing. None whatsoever. Disable power saving features. Now, again, when you start disabling power saving features, you do risk a chance of causing damage to your PC because your PC is not going to have those power saving features or those power safety features in place. Now, the only thing I do on my system when it comes to power saving, I disable hibernation because I don't allow my PC to hibernate. I'm a power user. I'm always at my PC most of the time. What I do is under power options, make sure you have it set. If this is a desktop, it is set to high performance. Under a notebook, we can stop this now because this is just horrible. Under the notebook, if you do this, just open up settings. If you're a power user on your notebook, meaning you have your notebook plugged in all the time, I do, right? This is the notebook I take to work. When I come home, it's plugged in all the time. I never use the battery on it. I actually have the battery removed. If you go into power and battery, balanced is automatically set when you set up Windows. You can set to best performance. That's all you need to do. And then what I like to do is just bring up control panel really quick, because I'm old like that. And under power, I will disable, turn off display, and put computer to sleep when it's plugged in. And then I also change this here. Turn off hard disk, plugged in, never. That's actually an old school SSD tweak from back in the day. And we'll actually go into that here shortly. Now the power plan, they recommend balanced. By default, Windows power plan users set to high performance. Yes, that is correct. You can enable ultimate power performance. You don't need to. There's no reason. You're not going to benefit from it at all. Process scheduling, quantum, the amount of Windows process scheduler. Okay. Again, process scheduling, this isn't going to affect performance. Really, it's not. Okay? They're saying, so for gaming, it makes most sense to use long quantum and 3 times foreground boost since we want to maximize CPU time the game gets. It depends on the game you're playing. If you're using DirectX 12 or DirectX 11, they're low-K gaming, meaning that they're going to not use CPU as much, right? Your CPU, like depending on the resolution you play at, if you're playing at 1440p or above, you're GPU limited. Your CPU is not really going to come into play. That's why overclocking, like I watch guys like on their 4K systems, and they're like, oh, you know, I've got my processor overclocked to 6 gigahertz, and it's like, yeah, but it's not giving you anything. You're not getting the benefit out of that. You got a processor overclocked to 6 gigahertz, but you're using a 3060. Like, get a better GPU. Like, you're heavily GPU bound. Now, below that, if you're using 1080p gaming, yes, you are more CPU limited. Even at 1440p, some games now are CPU limited. This isn't going to increase performance. Like, basically, just enable Affinity. Just enable Affinity and let the system go. Like, it's not that hard to do. Again, MSI mode drivers, this doesn't exist in Windows 10 or 11 anymore. This doesn't happen. Alleviate IRQ sharing. Everything is virtual IRQ now. So you don't need to do this. This is like Windows 7, Windows 8, 8.1. This doesn't exist anymore. How to properly install NVIDIA drivers. Again, this is using the NVIDIA Clean Install. We've already gone over that on how to just do it yourself really quick. Lock GPU clocks. Okay. So let's get into this one really, really quick here. Okay. If you have, say, a 4090, like even Arturo in the retro RGB thing, he's talking about using a 3090 because it has the least amount of latency. I've contacted, because I'm on the Gamers Nexus Patreon forums, I've contacted Steve. I've asked about this shit. There's nothing in regards to latency differences between the 3060 and 3090. I have no clue what Arturo was talking about. He says he has some kind of graph. I've never seen any graph. If I search for 3060, 3090 latency differences, only thing that comes up is like FPS performance, right? Like, unless that's what he's talking about. But that just means performance, bud. Like, this is... Your terminology gets really, really weird. A 3090 is going to perform faster than a 3060, like no shit, right? And he's recommending doing it. Now let's take Arturo's mindset here, okay? So by using this, okay? So he's talking about running your CPU at 100% while idle, running your GPU at 100% at idle, disabling all C states and power saving features, okay? So do the math, right? You can get factory OC'd 4090s that use up to 600 watts of power. You factor in a 320 watt 13900K running at 100% full bore. So just idle on the desktop, you're using 920 watts of power. Now I'm going to bring up another guy here really quick. His name is Righty from the Taken L's. Shout out to Taken L's. If I can find him on here, there he is. Now, Righty uses a HP system. Where is it? We're going to find it here really quick. Up a little bit higher. Here it is. So this is the Acer Predator that he uses. And then he uses an HP. Where is it? HP. So he uses an HP Omen 9NA. Let's bring this up really quick. Now he has issues when he tries to run his, when he tries to use like, when he tries to use the, when he's running OBS, he's using his stream, he's trying to play Halo Infinite while he's streaming, while he's using NVIDIA Broadcast, and then his system will shut off sometimes. Now the issue with this is this unit comes with a 500 watt power supply. And of course the HP website crashes. Who cares? Shit. So with a 500 watt power supply, looking at the looking at 500 watts, he's got a 3070 Ti and he's got a 12700F. Together, if he were to use this tweak, this FGC OS, what would happen is he would be using 480 to 520 watts of his 500 watt power supply, right? You also have to factor in other system devices, memory, sound, hard drives, RGB lighting, keyboard, mouse, if your webcam's powered, or whatever else you have powered through your USB. By doing this method, imagine running a 4090 at full bore, 600 watts, while you're doing, like, I don't know, how long do tournaments last in the FGC? If somebody can shut that out in the comments, that'd be great, right? Say like an all day. You're running a 4090 at 100% for, say, like 12 hours straight. What if your system doesn't have proper cooling or the proper power like Lefty has, right? Do you know how much of an issue that's going to be? One, you risk burning out that 4090, that $3,000 Canadian GPU, right? You have other issues, like what if the power supply burns out, takes your motherboard, CPU, RAM, power, video card, everything with it, right? That's a possibility. What if your system just doesn't have the cooling capability, so you're throttling constantly, right? Again, like this, I do not recommend doing this. And again, I did it for testing purposes on my 3080 Ti. I was very worried about doing it, but I have a 1500 watt power supply in my system, so it doesn't really matter. Like power-wise, I don't care. I don't. I let the system, like when I'm not using the system, it goes back down to idle states. When I'm using a game, it goes into power states, right? The power increases, my performance increases. Those are there for a reason. Disabling those safety features, like, that's just the dumbest fucking thing possible. And again, like, he talks a lot about retro games. Why do you need a 4090 running at 100% to play Street Fighter 3 Third Strike? Shit, I could run that on a fucking mini PC using an Intel integrated graphics at 1080p and it would run at like 120 frames per second. There's no issue to... There's no reason to be doing this. Like, this is just stupid. I don't think any tech out there would recommend, yeah, you know, just disable the power states to run your GPU at 100% clocks while idle on the desktop. What could go wrong? And you got the same settings for Radeon, right? So that's pretty much useless. Interrupt affinity. This is what I was talking about. This is the same thing. Interrupt affinity is the same thing as... Where was it? As this here. Process scheduling. The quantum states. It's the same thing. Like, it's redundant, right? Automatically setting process affinities and priorities. Again, you don't have to do this. This isn't going to save you anything. You're not going to increase performance on your USB. It's not going to do that. Reserve CPU sets. There's no reason, again, to do that. There is a tool that you can use that isn't in any of these tweaks. There are some tools, and I'll get into more in this when I do my own Windows setup in the next video. It's called CPU Core on Parker. Some of you, I may have already got to do this. CPU Core on Parker basically just does, it adjusts Windows registry that no matter at what point in the system, threads will be parked. They will not be used. This just enables all threads, all cores to be used whenever this PC needs it, right? That way it's not getting parked. This can smooth out gameplay. It's not going to improve latency, though. Again, reserve CPU sets. Be careful in using Prime 95 because if you use AVX 512, you're going to get completely blown out temperature ratings on that thing. A lot of stuff does not use AVX 512. I believe in the latest processors it is actually disabled now. You don't... Be careful running Prime 95 and make sure you understand on how to set up small FTTs so that you don't like just fucking annihilate your processor. So low latency hardware. So now we get into the actual hardware things. This is where you benefit the most from any any type of latency problems, right? Like if you want to improve your latency, this is basically the stuff that makes sense, okay? Now, what doesn't make sense is the 13, like, recommending processors. Again, like, nobody in this day and age should be using a quad-core processor, right? You're looking at a 6-core to 8-core processor for gaming. Even if you look at something like Starfield doesn't even load 8 cores properly. It doesn't benefit from SMT or hyperthreading. So having a multi-core processor, it's good for other things like running background tasks and things like that. But again, with gaming, a lot of gaming doesn't really utilize a lot of like 8-core processors. I myself, I have 12-core 24 threads because I have a 13900K. So I don't benefit a lot from games on my processor, right? So when you're looking at, you know, performance-wise for a CPU, any 6-core to 8-core processor is going to be just fine. If you're doing video editing, yeah, you're going to benefit from more cores, of course, right? It's just a thing, right? Especially with video editing software that can use your GPU, it's going to be faster. And they're going back to like Z490. Like, that's why I said this is how old this thing is. Like, we're using the Z790 right now on Intel. 890 is coming out next month in October with the new Intel processors. So, like, this goes back quite a few generations. They do talk about some Z790s here. Again, this is nothing out of the ordinary, right? It's just like, buy this, buy high end, buy high end, buy high end. Now, with your RAM, again, like, if you're using an Intel-based system, let's say from an 8000 series, even a 7000 series, 3200 megahertz memory baseline. That's where you should start out at. Don't go above 3600. After 3600 on anything between the 8th gen and 11th gen. After 3600, you really don't benefit in gaming, and you could run into stability issues. Now, on the AMD side of things, it's a lot different. AMD recently released a new AJASA BIOS that is supposed to fix a lot of problems in regards to memory usage. On AMD processors, DDR5 especially, you shouldn't exceed 6000 megahertz DDR5 memory. With the new AJASA, 50-50 that you're going to get 6400 megahertz memory to work. There have been instances where it works flawlessly, then there's instances where it doesn't properly. On the Intel side for DDR5, I currently on my system use 7200 megahertz DDR5. I haven't run into any stability issues whatsoever. That doesn't mean that you might. Again, I would recommend on DDR5 on Intel, 6400. Don't go above that. Going above that, 50-50 chance you're going to run into a problem. And again, the lower the timing, so CL, right, your CAS latency, the lower the timings, the better. The faster your system's going to be. That will decrease latency the best, right? Now, that doesn't mean go out and buy like 7200 megahertz CL32 memory, because chances are of that working is going to be very, very slim. For DDR4, you're looking at between 14 and 16 CL. You may be able to overclock to lower that. That's not something I'm going to get into. Of course, GPUs, like again, like they're talking about processors back in the 4090s or the Z490, but then they're recommending GPUs that are from like a year ago. So it's like this guide is all over the place. 2080 Super Performance 3060 Ti, right? Like 3090 flagship NVIDIA offering. That's not the flagship. The flagship's the 4090. Like, and you have it listed right down here, right? Now, of course, like, but are you going to go out and buy a $3,000 video card so you could play Street Fighter 3 Third Strike? Don't think so, right? You could do that on an integrated Intel GPU, like an i620 or 650 or something like that. Like, it doesn't require a lot. And he does talk about emulation, and I don't think he understands how emulation works at all. Because I could emulate on an Intel 650 graphics, Iris graphics, I could emulate all the way up to the Wii U. Right? Anything over that, yeah, I'm going to need something more powerful. But, like, I'm not going to be emulating. He was talking about, like, retro games like Street Fighter 3, Street Fighter 2, games like that. They're not going to benefit from a 3060 Ti. Like, that's blown way out of proportions. Like, again, I don't know what he's talking about. Then they talk about storage. Now, there is one thing you should know about NVMe drives. So you have your SATA SSDs, you have your M.2 SSDs, which are basically just SSDs for M.2. Then you have NVMe M.2 drives. When you're purchasing an NVMe drive, just because, like, a drive will list itself as, like, 7,000 megabit read, 6,000 megabit write, or 6,000 gigabit write, or whatever, right? That's not the entire story. What you're looking at is you're looking at the 4K random read, random write. That's what you're looking at, the IOPs for the drive. The bigger that number, the better performance, the smoother the performance you're going to have with your games and with just using Windows in general. Because Windows and games aren't made from just giant, like, 4 gigabyte files. They're made from all these small files. So the 4K random reads, random writes, that's where the performance comes from. So recommending drives, like they say here, Samsung has a very questionable reliability. I've used Samsung for years. There was an issue here last year, or earlier this year, where Samsung had run into problems with a batch of 990s that were flashed with the wrong firmware. That was the problem. Samsung has now released a firmware for those drives. My 990 Pro wasn't affected when I bought it. I bought mine back in April. It functioned just fine. There has been a firmware update after that, so I've done that as well. That's very easy to do yourself. Beware of issues on Ryzen platforms. There are problems with Ryzen when it does pertain to some NVMe drives. Sometimes they will not be detected, even though the board states that it supports M.2 SATA. DJ Runo, you may know him from some of my live streams and everything. Awesome guy, has a beastly system, a 7950X 3D. He ran into problems with an M.2 drive that would not read in any of the ports on his system, but it would read in his old Intel system just fine. It comes down to compatibility. That's a JSA BIOS or firmware update from the manufacturer of the NVMe drive. Mice, of course, right? Like, again, they don't even get into game controllers in this at all. So, like, I don't see anybody playing Street Fighter 6 with a mouse, right? Or Street Fighter 3 with a mouse. So, with a mouse, I use an 8 kilohertz mouse. Again, most mice now designed nowadays are going to run at 1 kilohertz out the box. So forcing your ports to 1000 kilohertz polling rate isn't really going to matter when the mouse is already baseline running at that. My 8 kilohertz mouse, because I use a Razer 8 kilohertz Viper, that runs at 8 kilohertz out the box. I don't have to adjust anything with the software. It's automatically running at 8 kilohertz. Your controllers don't. Like a controller doesn't, because with a mouse, it's the tracking that matters on the mouse, right? On a controller, it doesn't, right? You push that button. Depending on the hardware within the controller, the circuit board, what is its USB speed? What is it pulling at, right? Now, most controllers, like a PlayStation 5 and everything like that, they pull at 1 kilohertz, right? Default, right? So adjusting your USB ports for your kilohertz, the problem is that there's some controllers out there, like I have a Quamba that doesn't. It's at 400 kilohertz, I believe. I have an old Quamba one here that I use, that I got from Psycho Dad. Shout out to Psycho Dad. I haven't seen him in a long time. He gave me this one here. I traded him for a copy of Street Fighter 6. And I've been playing with this Quamba stick. I don't have any issues. Now, when I tried setting it up on the FGC OS, it would not go above 400 kilohertz because the circuit board inside doesn't support anything faster.
Yesterday was a really slow day for me on stream. I didn't make a lot of support yesterday. It's you guys.
Okay, and next we'll get into monitors. Now with monitors, of course, like, there's 3 major features that you want to know about monitors.
I guess this dude is a piece of fucking garbage.
Okay, so now we're going to look at the monitors here. Now, of course, Hertz is going to be one of the big things. This is something that Phil doesn't even understand, and I don't think Arturo understands either, by listening to his retro RGB interview. Now, there's three main things that you want to look at when you're looking at monitor performance. You're going to be looking at hertz, the response time, and depending on the hardware within the system, DisplayPort 1.4 or DisplayPort 2.0, 2.1, or HDMI 2.0, 2.1. So let's look at hertz, okay? So hertz is the amount of frames that a monitor can display per second. So you have a 240 hertz monitor, it's going to display 240 frames per second, okay? Now we've already discussed this. If you have a video card that's capable of doing like 600 frames per second, but you only have like a 100 hertz monitor, use a frame limiter. Limit the amount of frames so that your GPU isn't overproducing, which can cause an increase in latency. Next, response time. Response time is the amount of time it takes for a pixel, one pixel on your screen, to turn from white to gray. Okay? Now this, Phil and Arturo get this mixed up all the time. You have hertz and you have response time. Your refresh rate and response time. They work in conjunction to produce the image. So you want to have something that has a very low response time. The problem is, like, if people are using TVs, like Phil does, right? We could actually bring up Phil's TV here. Let's bring that up really quick. Ratings.com. Sony X90J. So this is the TV Phil bought back in December when his old TV died. And I did a video covering that just to laugh at Phil because Phil basically picked the wrong TV. This TV is worse off than his old TCL Series 4. His TCL Series 4 had a way better response time than his Sony X90J. And we'll look at that here. So what Phil read when Phil saw response time, the reason why Phil went with this is because this Sony X90J, this number was bigger. The problem with that is because the response time, there's multiple... Let's see if I could bring up... That's the X90K. Okay. So this is your input lag and your response time. So if, again, like Phil was reading just the big, he thought immediately bigger number, better, right? And that wasn't true. The reason why that wasn't true is because, one, his TCL Series 4 doesn't support variable refresh rate. This one does. And the input lag is higher on this. It has a higher score, but that's because it supports resolutions and supports HDR methods that his old TCL Series 4 didn't. So it had more plotting points, which artificially increased the score. So Phil plays at 4K 60. Phil seems to think he's at 1080p 30. We'll get into that in another video because that's something I trolled him on Friday. So Phil plays at 4K 60 Hz. He does not use HDR. He does not use chroma subsampling. He plays in game mode, but he's at 18.1 milliseconds. On his old TCL Series 4, this was lower. Series 4. No, we need it from 2019, 2020. This response time was 6.0, variable refresh rate, input lag 19. So we look at his 4K. So his 4K 60 on his old TCL Series 4 was 12.6 milliseconds, so 6 milliseconds lower on his older TV. So Phil really fucked up bad, right? Because Phil didn't know what he was doing when he was buying this new TV that he way overpaid for because he got it on fucking... He fundraised for it. He had enough money just out of the fundraising alone, but then he decided to fucking finance it. Ended up paying like almost twice as much for the TV than what it was worth. It was fucking hilarious. Paid for them to bring it upstairs because his fat ass couldn't lift it, but they ended up lifting it anyways. So you can see with response time, like input lag, there's a lot of difference as it pertains from a TV to a gaming monitor. A gaming monitor, you're going to get way better response time. right? TVs typically have a higher response time rather than like 0.1 milliseconds. They're going to have a couple seconds. You can see on Phil's there with his input lag is 12 milliseconds on his old one, 18.7 on his new. So that's even worse. So the way I look at it is, and the industry, there's actually a video on Linus Tech Tips. That didn't age well. They do a test, basically testing a bunch of different hertz monitors. They just get a bunch of random people to come in and try to pick out which monitor is smoother. And they go all the way up to, I think, 480 hertz, I believe. And in that video, people can't figure it out, right? Basically, anything between 60 and 120 hertz is very noticeable. After 120 hertz, all the way up to, I think right now they have like a 980 hertz monitor, people can't tell. And the 980 hertz monitors, they have very, very bad response time and very, very bad input lag. Basically, your gaming monitors right now, anything between 120 and 360 hertz is perfect. That's what you're going to be looking at. Now, then comes into things like quantum dot technology, mini LED, or OLED. A lot of these do factor in, and there is one monitor on the market, and this possibly is the bestest monitor right now, and that is a Dell, what is it? QOLED monitor. This is possibly the best monitor on the market right now. Yeah, there we go. This is the best monitor on the market right now for gaming. Hands down. Beats everything. Why? Go away. Go away. Go away. Fuck you, Dell. So if we look at the specs on the monitor, where is it? Tech specs review. So it's a OLED plus quantum dot. Okay, so you have quantum dot, mini LED, and OLED all in one monitor. You get 1,000 hertz peak, or you get 1,000 peak brightness, 1 million to 1 to contrast ratio. You also get HDR 1000 with display HDR or black HDR 400, which is cool, right? You get a better blacks on this. This screen also supports, where is it? Here. Be 0.1 millisecond, because I've actually gamed on this thing. So 0.1 millisecond gray to gray. 1800R curve, 3440 by 1440p screen. Supports 175 hertz refresh rate. So you basically get everything all in one. This screen is beautiful, but expensive. $1,600 Canadian for this screen. I would love to get this screen. That's like my dream screen right here. HDMI 2.1, DisplayPort 1.4. So this is the best screen you can get out there, because you get the color, you get the responsiveness, you get the hertz, you get the response time, and you get the quality. Everything all in one, right? This is the best gaming monitor you can get on the market. I don't care about people that are thinking, oh, I got a 360 hertz monitor or 480 hertz monitor. Yeah, I don't give a shit. I'd rather have this. You're not going to notice the hertz outside of this monitor. And the performance is just crazy, right? I want one. Somebody send me some money. Tips are mandatory, guys. So let's get back to this. So we've covered the monitors. Miscellaneous links, and this is all nothing. This is just overclocking utilities, ISOs, things like that. So none of this pertains to it whatsoever. So let's get back to the FGC OS. So this is what Arturo recommends doing in his system. Now, I don't know if Arturo does this himself. I would hope not. And if Arturo has done this to your PC, again, what I recommend is formatting and reloading your PC. So special K, turn on link, special K. Open this up here. Ah! Okay, we will not be opening that. Turn on latent sync, add fightcade, all input, no display. Again, it's just for setting up adaptive sync off. Would I recommend disabling adaptive sync? No. All input, no display, OSD off. Now, this one here, I used this on mine, and I ran into issues using the HID USB-F. Now, HID USB-F is used for just basically adjusting, like, polling rates and everything on your mouse, keyboard, and everything like that. Again, I use an 8 kilohertz mouse. It automatically runs at 8 kilohertz. So you don't have to do this, and this is very tricky. If you follow the steps within the Calypso latency guide, you will run into issues when you're plugging in game controllers, because the controllers have to be configured manually. This is one step for configuring them manually. I wouldn't recommend doing this, but I did do it again. I couldn't benefit because my Quamba didn't function above 400 kilohertz. DS4 for Windows. Why? Like, I have a PS5 controller and I have my Quamba. Why would I want my PS5 or my Quamba operating like a Xbox controller? Like, maybe back in the day when Steam and shit didn't have drivers and stuff like that available for PlayStation 5 controllers and everything, but they do now. You don't need to use this. ISLC. Now, this... Let's download it. ISLC is for adjusting the timer. Extract the file. Okay. So basically what this would do is you use it to purge a standby list. This wipes out stuff that's loaded into memory. Right? You would also have to download maximum timer resolution of 0.5 milliseconds, which is great. Maximum timer resolution 15.625. Now, this is what you would do with disable dynamic tick. You would then need to disable HPET, the driver within Windows, and then you would have to configure this manually using the timers, right? Current timer resolution 1 millisecond, perfect. Maximum timer resolution 0.5, minimum timer resolution 15.625. This is perfectly fine. This is what you want, okay? You don't want to adjust this. Once you start adjusting the timer resolution, then you're going to be running into latency problems. Unless you know what you're doing, don't use this. Okay, now I used it. I adjusted the timer manually and everything within Windows, and I set mine to match, right? So this is what I wanted. This is what I'm looking for, right? You can purge your standby list before you start your game. Purge your standby list, then start your game. Okay, get back to it. And then OBS settings, optional. Now, I'll get more into OBS when I do my setup, and we're going to go through everything because, you know, Phil, the idiot that he is, runs his bitrate at 12,000 kilobits per second up to 16,000 kilobits per second for 1080p 60, which he really isn't streaming at. He's more along the lines of 660p to 720p, and then relying on YouTube to upscale it for him. We've been over that. Game-specific optimizations. Again, your basic thing, like if you're going to be using the NVIDIA control panel to control things like VSync, control ultra-low latency, you should disable those features within your game. Now, if your game supports NVIDIA Reflex, okay? NVIDIA Reflex, like I said earlier, will disable low latency mode and use NVIDIA Reflex instead. Again, what I recommend using is a frame limiter, right? Make sure you're set to prefer maximum performance for the power setting, high performance with VSync off or on, doesn't matter. To me, because I'm playing Diablo 4 right now, I keep it on because I get massive screen tearing outside of that.
Now check this flow, dog.
Right, so again, you get disable VSync. This is, of course, it's basically repetitive. Disable, disable, disable. Fightcade, I don't know why he's recommending install DirectX drivers, because the DirectX drivers will install with it. Configure controller, download the FC2 JSON pack. Yes. I recommend doing this that way, so when you go to a game, it'll automatically download the game for you. You don't have to go looking for the ROM. Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, he has absolutely nothing. To Ken overlay, big deal. Street Fighter 5. Set input delay reduction to on. Yes. This is the same thing as Street Fighter 6. Make sure VSync is off. Yes. So these are just regular game tweaks. This is normal shit. It's not really anything. And that's the end of the FGC OS install. Now, again, there's a bunch of tweaks that he hasn't done. CPU core parking, he hasn't disabled. TCP/IP optimization, you can actually download a tool that will do it for you and set your MTU accordingly to your ISP's MTU. There's also things like, we can bring it up here really quick. So if you want better responsiveness within your system, open up this, it's control panel, desktop, menu show delay. Set it to 0, default's 500. That's when you bring over something like this, and you have a window. See how mine come up instantly? If it's set to 500, it'll take about 5 seconds for the video to come up. Mine comes up instantly because I'm using a value of 0, plus I have a lot of memory and a fast hard drive. Underneath mouse hover time. If you adjust mouse hover time, so when you do something like that, it comes up immediately instead of waiting. Again, this is set to 500. HKey, local machine, software, or no, system, software, Microsoft. So right here, wait to kill app timeout. So when you shut down your computer, it takes about a couple seconds for it to shut off all the Windows services and shut the computer down or restart. I set mine to 0, so it kills it upon, right when I click it, it's killing everything. This speeds it up, disabling no GUI of boot. The one thing I am really surprised that he isn't recommending is disabling system protection. Mine I have completely killed. Now this is system restore. On my PCs, I have nothing of any value. I have a network attached storage, a NAS drive that does all my backups for me. That way I don't need to use system restore. This does take up hard drive cycles, right? So disabling that will improve hard drive performance. Also, disabling this and automatic restart. If your system does crash, like I did have crashes with FGC OS, access violation errors, IRQ not less or equal to errors, which was driver related, probably because of that MSI tool that they recommend using. That caused issues with me. Disabling remote assistance, make sure that's turned off. What else? What else is a nice quick tweak for you guys to use? We already went through the msconfig tweak, just disabled the GUI so it boots faster. Oh, there's one more thing. So if you're using an NVMe drive, not an M.2 SATA or a SATA drive, but an NVMe drive, disabling this, turn off Windows write cache. Because the NVMe drives are so quick, you don't need caching to the NVMe drive. So it's completely useless. So this can speed up performance for the NVMe drive because it doesn't have to cache twice. So those are the tweaks. So up next, I'm going to show you the performance differences between the how bad the performance was with FGC OS. This is the 13900K prior. This is from last week when I did the full FGC OS install. So you can see all the software that I have installed here. And we'll just listen to me narrate this afterwards. So this is, so we see we have everything installed. Everything is running. Special K I had installed, right? Special K is in the background there, yeah. Intelligent standby list is running, and the HD, as you can see, I had issues with the controller because the controller would not properly function with this software that he recommends. But let's take a listen. So we'll have to adjust some settings here right away. Because this is going to be on a first boot of Street Fighter 6. Yeah. Ain't gonna work with Fucking shaders. New version available, restart. Now, you might ask, do you find this, Prophet, do you find this any snappier? No, I don't. In reality, like, I found it a little bit slower for reaction time, especially things within Windows itself, as opposed to my setup. I did run into issues here shortly. You'll see there's a little bit of stuttering in the Street Fighter 6. Okay, so we're going to go into the options. We're going to adjust some graphic settings here really quick. Display, graphics. So we got a 1920 by 1080. Perfect. Basic graphic settings. Let's take a look. Crowded, windowed, maximum frame rate. We'll set it to 120 and we'll leave it there for now. Motion blur on, VSync off. I'm very surprised that they have a max frame rate cap in Street Fighter 6 of 120. On the Xbox and the PlayStation 5 it is actually capped at 60. Anti-aliasing, I'm going to disable that. Even though I am playing at 1080p on this system here, on my monitor itself, because I run 3440 by 1440, or when I'm playing on my big screen I run at 4K, you're better off having anti-aliasing disabled. You're not going to notice the jaggies on a higher resolution. On lower resolutions you are. But this is going to save us some performance without really affecting image quality. 2 or 30 FPS, don't care. Display mode, that's what you want. Borderless windowed. So we'll keep that like that. That's good. And that's the thing with DirectX 12 games. All DirectX 12 games, there's no dedicated full screen. It's borderless window. Good. Detailed graphics, ultra high. So we're going to keep everything at their highest that we can possibly do, and we're going to input delay reduction. Changing settings on. Are you sure these things increase load on your CPU, which may cause shadow or slowdowns depending on your system's capabilities? We'll keep that on. Okay, so all of our settings are now set. So let's jump into a game. So what I want to do first is I just want to test responsiveness while I'm playing. So let's go into Fighting Ground. We'll play against do a versus one-on-one battle. Commentary off. Rounds 3. Timer next. Go with that. Whoops. And I'll pick the broken... Had a little stutter there, which was weird. I'll pick Broken Ken. I don't want to use modern, I want to use classic. CPU. Let's go against Phil here. Okay, costume 1. Okay. Now, of course, I am capturing on my EVGA XR1 Pro, so there's going to be no delay whatsoever, because I am operating on a second PC. I'm not operating on the same PC that I'm currently playing. Now, I'm noticing, like, no delay whatsoever. It's actually pretty smooth. But again, like, delay to me, like, I don't really notice input lag. Realistically, like, when you're playing at a tournament, again, you're not going to be on a PC. You're going to be on a console. You're not going to be on PC. So something like this really isn't going to matter. And after this, we're going to go test an online match. We'll see what online plays like. Oh, stupid. We'll get him into a throw loop. We'll do it. Phil does. This throw loop. Okay, well, that's not working out really well. So we'll go online and see what it's like. As you can see, like, I don't play very often Street Fighter 6 anymore. I played the hell out of the Mortal Kombat 1 beta. We had it on my cousin's Xbox Series X, and he quit at level. Usually these are pretty top tier Ryu. $70 millisecond. And again, I'm not feeling any input lag whatsoever. It seems to be going perfectly fine. And this is at 73 milliseconds, so I'm not getting any input lag whatsoever. Again, like, Phil's input lag, when Phil's screaming about dropped inputs, remember, that stuff doesn't actually happen. Phil's been proved wrong time and time again in Street Fighter 6. So, that input lag shit, or dropped inputs... So, we're actually hitting pretty high latency. Seems to be having difficulty. Now remember, this is the FGC OS with latency mod. So we followed their thing, so there is issues. I do not have CPU throttling enabled. My system is set for pure performance. I've disabled all the power management features within Windows in regards to the FGC OS. So we are seeing latency problems with the FGC OS itself. It is not up to stuff, apparently, according to this. This is using their own tools that they recommend, and this is using their operating system. So would I recommend the FGC OS for an everyday use? No. This is not a daily driver. Obviously, there's issues. I don't think the FGC OS has been updated in a very long time, and there have been adjustments to drivers in Windows over, I think, like the last year or so, 2 years. So I think that was like the last time. When was the FGC OS? We can actually bring that up here. FGC OS. Take a look at documentation. So the last time this was updated, it is in April 30th, 2023, so this year. Obviously, there's an issue with the FGC OS. I've followed everything to the letter, to what they recommend, and obviously there is an interrupt issue, but I didn't notice it, and I was still able to play just fine. So, realistically, like, is this meant for online play? I don't believe so. It's probably meant more for offline play, like I said, friends house of the cabinet, maybe like an underground tournament or something like that on PC. But again, at tournaments, they're not going to be using a PC. They're going to be using a PlayStation 5, most likely. Maybe an Xbox Series X. So, is this a good indication? Like, is what Phil's saying true? Of course not. Phil lies. That's what he does. Phil is not very good at Street Fighter 6. We've noticed this week that you only need a 25% win rate to reach Master. Phil is considerably higher than that, of course. But Phil's just an average player. So, like, looking at this is the FGC OS. So this is what I tested last weekend. After this, I went and installed it on my streaming PC, my notebook, because I wanted to. That's the one at the bottom right here. I wanted to see exactly what the performance is going to be like for streaming. Unfortunately, I had even more serious issues. I kept getting access violation problems. I had Hyper-V or hypervisor issues within the event viewer, Windows Event Viewer. The system would just stop responding multiple times on when I was trying to set up a stream and stuff like that. So I didn't stream on Friday. Again, I had reached out to Arturo for an interview. He hasn't given me one. I'm now filming this video to just basically go over the entire FGC OS install, the tweaks, what they do and what they don't do, and the problems they can cause. As you can see from my testing, the FGC OS is not what it says it is, right? What I would recommend is, if you have this installed again, probably format reload your PC, set up Windows properly. This can cause issues. Yes, you can damage your PC by running this. The one thing we didn't go over, actually, let's go over that right now. Sorry, we missed that. So they recommend in the Calypso latency tweak to disable all the power management for USB. Now, in doing so, let's bring this up here. Now, when you bring up Device Manager, go full screen, you go into Universal Serial Bus Controllers. Let's see. Not that. It's power management. So, this is the option that they recommend to do. Allow the computer to turn off the device to save power. This should always be checked. Do not uncheck this. Now, I know Old Man Alt has been having issues. He did this on his system. And I'm going to show you why you shouldn't do this. If you're having what's called USB crosstalk problems, that's where you're talking on your microphone and all of a sudden your microphone like cuts in and out. The reason for that is, where is that picture? Is it? Yes, okay. So this is Alt's motherboard. This is his I/O on his motherboard. Now, if you look at the controller here, so these two ports, these four down here actually, and this one here, and the USB-C are all controlled by one controller. The USB 2.0 is actually controlled by the motherboard chipset, right? Which would have been called the Southbridge back in the day. The problem with these is USB crosstalk. All these USB ports here all share power. So these ports are capable of about 5 volts. This is USB 3.2, this is USB 3.1, and USB-C. The issue with this is this port is capable of 5 volts. If you're using the full 5 volts power, none of these ports will be able to power anything. So the Calypso solution is to disable the power management, and it will force 5 volts through everything. Depending on the quality of the power traces, this could be an issue for you, and it can cause USB dropout. What I would recommend is buy a powered USB hub. Let's bring this up here. New window. Brought it back onto my other screen, so let's just bring it over. Sabrent. Sabrent makes an actual really good one. Now again, I use Thunderbolt, so I don't need anything like this anymore. So Sabrent offers these, right? Now I have tested the 16-port hub. This hub is awesome. Each has an individual power button. So you see here in the picture, right? These little black squares, these are the power button for each individual port. And it supports 5 volts through every single port. You don't have to worry about data transfer rates on these, because even if you were to plug in, say, your capture card, your microphone, your USB audio, your keyboard, your mouse, your controller, everything like that, it's going to have enough power and still have enough bandwidth. And all you do is you'll be using one port on the back of your motherboard. So you would use one of these ports, the USB 3.2. So it'll just be plugged in through there. Then you won't be having power issues. The problem is if you disable the power protection for these, like I showed you here in the device manager, you can burn out your USB ports. I've seen it happen on many PCs. It's actually common for it to happen. Notebooks, it's common for it to happen. The power traces just aren't very well done. If you want to take a look at a really good IT guy on YouTube, Adam IT, look him up. He does some amazing fucking shit when it comes to like replacing caps and everything like that on the motherboards, fixing units that suffer from these issues. What I would recommend, Alt, if you're listening, if you watch this, man, go buy yourself a nice little USB hub, plug it into one of these ports, plug all your shit to that USB hub. It'll solve probably the audio issues that I've been noticing. It'll really improve for you. So that's one thing I missed, and I apologize, guys. So don't do it. Don't do what he is recommending about disabling the USB power. So FGC OS. I want to reach out to some people. If you have this installed, please contact me. I'd really like to go through it and maybe run some tests on your system just to be on the safe side. Art, if you watch this, I'm actually going to send this to you before I even upload it to YouTube. Take a look. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer. No, I am not allowing you access to my system. Again, what you're trying to do is commendable, but it's not viable. The reason why they use consoles at tournaments, like EVO, the last EVO was played on a PS5, is the ease of use. What you're considering doing isn't going to work for every computer out there. Every computer is different. So every computer has a different power supply. Every computer has a different motherboard. Every computer functions differently. Depending on how the USB is divided up, depending on how many USB controllers you have, that is an issue. If you only have one USB controller on the motherboard, well, you're going to have problems. That's why you're going to have to use a USB hub. It is not going to add latency using a USB hub. Well, if you use a bad one, then probably yeah, right? Now, the issue that you're going to run into, Art, is because, like, maybe for underground tournaments, like local tournaments, if you want to do this, I can't stop you, but you are going to burn out PCs and stuff like that by doing some of the Calypso tweaks that you're suggesting. The other problem is trying to get tournament organizers to move over to this. I don't see it working. The tournament organizers, all they're going to want to do is bring in a console, plug it in, have two guys fight it out in Street Fighter 6. That's the way this works. The amount of setup time that you're going to have to do per PC is insane. Like you shouldn't have to do it. And I know you've been talking about trying to get it into like an executable where you could just install Windows. You'd be better off going with like an ISO, like what ReviOS does, if you choose to go this route. But as I have proven through my video here, it doesn't work. So I honestly don't understand what you're trying to accomplish. Like, the response time is already good on a Windows 11, like a Windows 11 setup PC, set up properly, right? Without doing some of these weird-ass tweaks that were used back like in Windows XP and Windows Vista. So, nice try. Like, it's commendable what you're trying to do, but again, it's just not going to work. Alright, now next week I'm going to be doing another video on my setup because I want to go into basically Phil stating how he can't update from Windows 8.1 to 10 because it's going to break his computer. I'm going to actually prove that wrong. We're going to go through an entire setup, updating the BIOS, installing Windows, installing all the drivers properly, configuring Windows, doing a little bit of tweaks like I do, and then I'll show you what my OS latency is. Alright? So I want to thank you guys for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.